The sky over Texas looked wrong. The clouds were stacked heavy and dark, rolling toward the plains like an army ready for war. Most folks in Blue Rock County were rushing west with wagons packed high, trying to outrun the monster storm heading straight for them. But one man was riding into it. Dr. Warren Hale, a frontier veterinarian known for doing the jobs no one else would, pushed his tired buckskin gelding through the rising wind. His slicker snapped against his legs. Dust and dirt stung his face. The storm was still hours away, but it already felt like the whole world was shaking apart. He had no business being out here, not in the direct path of a hurricane that had crawled inland from the Gulf with unnatural strength. But a rider had reached him at dawn with a desperate message. A ranch on the far edge of the valley had been abandoned in a hurry. Animals were hurt. Horses were trapped. No one else could make it out there in time, so Warren did what he always did. He saddled up, kissed his wife Claire on the forehead, and rode toward the danger instead of away from it. Their teenage boy stood on the porch, watching his father disappear into the wind with worry stretching across his face. Warren wasn't sure he'd be coming back either. But when horses needed help, he never hesitated. That was who he was. That was who he had always been. The trail he followed ran beside the Brazos River, now swollen and angry from days of rain. Water sloshed across the path, turning the ground into thick mud that sucked at his gelding's hooves. His hat brim shook in the wind as he leaned low in the saddle, urging the horse on. He had been a vet for 18 years, but this ride was different. This one felt like a gamble between life and death. He reached the place where the trail split, a point marked by a tall cedar tree. Or it used to be. The storm had ripped half the tree from the ground and thrown it across the road like a fallen giant. Warren stopped, blinking rain from his eyes as the wind howled harder. No wagon could move past that tree, no rider either, except him. He swung down and tied his gelding to a bent fence post. The horse snorted nervously, ears pinned back as lightning flashed over the horizon. "I know, boy," Warren said softly, "but we ain't done yet." He grabbed his medical satchel, slung it across his shoulder, and started on foot. The storm grew louder, pushing sheets of rain sideways. The world around him turned gray and shifting. Trees creaked, branches snapped. The rising wind made the tall grass bow flat. Half a mile from the ranch, a strange sound cut through the storm. Not the wind, not thunder, a cry, a trembling, desperate cry. Warren froze. Horses. Not one, many. He pushed through the brush toward the sound, his boots sinking into muddy ground. Every new step made his heart pound harder. Horses didn't cry like that unless they were trapped, hurt, or dying. Another call echoed across the storm, high, sharp, filled with terror. He forced his way through a tangle of mesquite and came out into an open field and stopped dead in his tracks. The ranch looked deserted. The house stood dark, its roof half torn away. Fences were broken. Tools lay scattered across the yard like the owners had run for their lives. But the pasture held something far worse. 12 horses stood tied to a long fence rail, water rising around their legs. Some were shaking. Some were barely able to stand. Their ribs stuck out sharp beneath soaked, dirty coats. Their heads hung low, eyes dull from starvation and fear. Whoever owned them hadn't fed them in weeks, maybe months. And the ropes were so tight they couldn't move an inch to escape the rising flood. The storm was going to drown them. Warren's breath caught in his throat. No animal deserved this. No creature should be left to die this way. He stepped into the water, moving toward the nearest horse, a trembling roan mare. The mare lifted her head weakly as he approached, but she didn't try to pull away. She was too tired, too broken. "It's all right, girl," Warren whispered. "I've got you now." He took out his knife and cut the rope. The mare stumbled free, splashing forward, but she didn't run. She just stood beside him, as if she didn't trust her own legs to carry her. One by one, Warren cut the ropes from the others. A bay gelding nearly collapsed on top of him. A young filly coughed and wheezed with every breath. An older paint horse stared at him with eyes so empty they broke something deep inside him. Then Warren reached the last horse, a young black stallion. thin, starving, but standing tall. His eyes were bright, too bright for an animal on the edge of death. When Warren stepped close, the stallion didn't flinch or pull back. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against Warren's chest. The storm roared around them, shaking the ground. Warren wrapped a hand around the stallion's neck, feeling the trembling strength beneath the soaked coat. "You held them together, didn't you?" Warren murmured. "You kept them fighting." The stallion breathed out softly, almost like an answer. Warren cut the rope, freeing him. But unlike the others, the stallion didn't move away. He stayed right beside Warren, watching him, waiting. Then the wind shifted, and Warren saw something that made his stomach drop. A wall of storm clouds racing toward them, fast and violent. They had minutes, maybe less, before the full force of the hurricane hit. And Warren Hale had 12 starving horses and no safe place to take them. The first blast of the hurricane hit with a force that nearly knocked Warren off his feet. The wind roared like a freight train barreling across the plains, tearing branches from trees and whipping sheets of rain sideways. The horses panicked, stumbling and crowding together as the water in the pasture rose even faster. "We have to move," Warren shouted, though his voice barely carried above the storm. He scanned the ranch for anything, any structure that could shelter 12 weakened horses. The barn sat farther up the slope, its roof sagging but still standing. It was their only chance. Warren clapped his hands loudly, trying to get the horses' attention. "Come on, up the hill!" The young black stallion was the first to respond. He lifted his head, ears pricked toward Warren, and took a few strong steps. The others watched him closely. Even starving and exhausted, they trusted the stallion's leadership. One by one, the horses followed as the black stallion pushed forward, nudging the weakest horses with gentle insistence. Warren waded through the rising water beside them, guiding the ones who staggered or slipped. A bay gelding's legs buckled, and Warren threw his shoulder under the animal's neck, gritting his teeth as he helped him stand. The hurricane's outer wall slammed into them again, blasting rain so hard it felt like gravel hitting skin. "Keep going!" Warren yelled, half to himself, half to the horses. The stallion kept the herd moving until they reached the barn. The door hung crooked on one hinge, but the inside looked dry enough to survive the storm. Warren shoved the door open the rest of the way and waved the horses inside. They filed in slowly, trembling, soaked, half collapsing, but alive. When the black stallion entered, he paused in the doorway, turned his head, and looked out at the storm as if counting the others one last time. Only when he was certain they had all made it in did he step inside. Warren closed the barn door and latched it with an old iron bar. The wind howled against the wood, rattling the frame, but the structure held. Inside, the dim light revealed the full extent of the horses, suffering. Their coats were dull with filth. Their bellies were hollow. Cuts and sores marked their skin. Some shook from cold, others from starvation. Warren's heart tightened. Whoever had owned these horses had left them to die long before the storm hit. He knelt beside the roan mare he freed first. Her whole body trembled. "Easy, girl. You're safe now." He opened his medical kit and started with what little he had: electrolyte paste, wound wraps, small rations of nutrient gel. He worked quickly but carefully, moving from horse to horse, trying to stabilize the most critical cases first. The storm outside grew louder. The barn walls groaned under the pressure, dust drifting from the rafters each time a new gust slammed the roof. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the wood, lighting the horses' tired eyes. Through it all, the black stallion watched Warren. Whenever a horse panicked, he stepped near them, touching noses, calming them. When one collapsed halfway, the stallion stood over them, lending his warmth and steady presence. "You're something special," Warren whispered as he checked the stallion's gums and ran a hand down his neck. "You kept all of them alive longer than any man could have." But as he worked, Warren realized the truth. Saving them from the storm was only the beginning. Their bodies were on the edge of collapse. Starved horses couldn't just be fed. They needed slow, careful rehabilitation, or they could die from sudden refeeding. He needed supplies. He needed help. He needed a team. But the storm had wiped out every trail in and out of the valley. No one was coming. Not tonight. He would have to get these 12 horses through the hurricane on his own. Hours passed. The storm raged stronger. Rain drummed on the roof until it felt like the sky itself was falling. The barn rattled. Boards bent. A section of the roof tore loose with a crack like gunfire, letting a burst of wind and water blast inside. The horses cried out and stumbled back. Warren jumped to his feet. "Easy! Easy now!" Then another sound broke through the storm. A groan, deep, low, and dangerous. The barn's main support beam was cracking. The whole structure shuddered. "No," Warren breathed. "Not now." Not with them inside. The black stallion suddenly stepped forward, placing himself between the beam and the herd, spreading his stance, lowering his head. Protecting them, as if he understood. Warren grabbed one of the broken stalls and shoved it under the sagging beam, fighting the wind that howled through the new opening. His muscles shook with the effort. Rain soaked him to the bone. Lightning lit the sky again, showing the beam bowing with each gust. The stallion pushed his shoulder against Warren's side, steadying him, helping him hold the brace in place. Together, man and horse fought to keep the barn standing. At last, the pressure eased. The beam settled onto the support, Warren wedged beneath it. The barn still stood, battered but holding strong. Warren leaned against the wall, chest heaving. "You," he whispered to the stallion, "are the strongest soul I've ever known." The storm raged on long into the night, but inside the barn, the horses slowly stopped shaking. Their breathing steadied, their eyes softened. They began to believe, just a little, that they might survive. And Warren Hale realized something he hadn't expected. He wasn't just keeping them alive, they were keeping him alive too. The storm finally began to fade just before dawn. The wind eased into tired gusts, and the rain softened into a steady whisper against the battered barn roof. The worst had passed, but Warren knew the battle wasn't over. 12 starving horses still stood on the edge of collapse, and now that the hurricane had loosened its grip, the real work was about to begin. Warren pushed open the barn door and stepped outside into a landscape that looked torn apart. Trees lay scattered like broken matchsticks. Fences were gone. The pasture was a lake of brown water. The main ranch house had lost half its roof. The world felt strangely quiet after a night of destruction. He looked back at the barn, hearing soft nickers inside. They were waiting for him. When he returned, the black stallion approached first, slow and steady. His eyes were no longer wild with fear. They were clear, sharp, and searching Warren's face as if asking, "What now?" Warren exhaled. "Now, boy, now we rebuild." He spent the morning checking each horse again, noting their temperatures, heart rates, wounds, and hydration. Some were improving already. Others needed far more help than he could provide alone. He needed food. He needed clean water. He needed medicine. But the storm had destroyed every path out of the valley. Warren tightened his jaw. Then he saddled his buckskin gelding, gathered what was left of his supplies, and prepared for the hardest ride of his life. "I'll be back," he promised the horses. "Hold on." He looked at the black stallion before leaving. The stallion took a step toward him, lowering his head briefly, brushing his muzzle against Warren's sleeve. It felt like a vow. Warren rode into the flooded valley. The journey took everything he had, wading through chest-deep water, cutting through fallen trees, pushing past wreckage. What should have been a 40-minute ride took nearly 4 hours. Exhausted, cold, and soaked, he reached the outskirts of Blue Rock. The town was in chaos, roofs torn off, wagons overturned. People gathered in the streets, shaken but alive. When townsfolk saw Warren, mud-covered and dripping, riding in from the storm, they stared at him like he was a ghost who had crawled out of the hurricane. Sheriff Gentry stepped forward, jaw slack. Warren Hale. Nobody's supposed to be alive out there. There are 12 horses near the old ranch, Warren said, breathing hard. Starved, tied, abandoned. I got them into the barn, but they won't last long without help. The sheriff blinked. 12? Someone left them to die, Warren said. The storm didn't kill them, only because I got there in time. But I can't save them alone. The sheriff didn't hesitate. All right, who's riding? Quote, within minutes, volunteers gathered, ranchers, stable hands, farmers, even townsfolk who had never worked with horses before. They loaded wagons with hay, medicine, blankets, tools, buckets, and fresh water. Warren led them back through the broken valley. The black stallion was the first to greet them, stepping out of the barn with steady confidence. The townspeople gasped when they saw him. He's thin as a fence rail, someone whispered. But look at him stand, someone else said. The stallion lowered his head and gently nudged Warren's shoulder, as if proudly presenting the herd he had watched over. The rescue effort began immediately. Hay was spread. Clean water was hauled in. Wounds were cleaned. Medicine was given. Blankets were placed over trembling backs. Through it all, the stallion moved among the herd, checking each horse, nudging the weakest ones forward, calming the restless ones. By sundown, the barn felt different. The hopelessness was gone. In its place stood 12 horses, who now believed they might survive. Over the next weeks, the entire valley rallied behind the rescue. Families delivered feed. Blacksmiths repaired tools. Children carried fresh water. Every day, Warren rode out to the barn, and every day the horses grew stronger. But no recovery shined brighter than the black stallion's. He gained weight. His coat regained its shine. His eyes turned bright with life. And through every step of healing, he stayed close to Warren, shadowing him with quiet loyalty. It wasn't long before folks started calling the stallion a miracle, an animal who refused to die, refused to quit, refused to leave the others behind. One crisp morning, with the sun warming the valley and the worst of the storm damage finally repaired, Warren stood beside the stallion in the pasture. You weren't meant to be left to die, he said softly. You were meant to be found. The stallion nudged him gently, as if agreeing. Warren placed his hand on the stallion's neck. And as long as I'm breathing, you'll never know fear again. Quote, the horse lifted his head high, mane blowing in the returning Texas breeze, strong and proud, no longer a victim of the storm, but a survivor who had carried others with him. 12 horses had been abandoned to die, but because one man rode into danger and one stallion refused to give up, they all found life again.